Next on Sisterhood of the Second Act.
Addiction is an epidemic. When OxyContin became an alternative for pain treatment, it set in motion a wave of overdoses in Southwest Virginia and all across the country. Beth Macy documented how the drug devastated whole communities in her New York Times bestseller, Dopesick. She is here to talk about turning the book into a Golden Globe nominated miniseries and her latest project. Pam Rickard appeared to have it all, a great family and job, but through it all, alcohol was whittling away at it. She has found sobriety and a mission that pairs her love of running with helping others find sobriety. We'll meet both of these women on this edition of Sisterhood of the Second Act right after this.
Sisterhood of the Second Act is brought to you by looking for your first home or retirement home. Realtor Monica Nicely can help you find it. Whether you're moving in or out of the Roanoke region, call Monica 540-449-2019, 540-449-2019. Alcova Mortgage Loan Officer Jonathan Sweat helps you seal the deal with the loan to suit your needs with great rates and terms. Call Jonathan 540-314-8843, 540-314-8843.
Alcova Mortgage, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS ID number 40508, MLSConsumerAccess.org. Terms and conditions apply. All loans subject to credit approval.
I'm going to be an oak tree.
I think I'll be a dogwood tree.
My kids said they'd be looking for a thorny tree for me.
With Evergreen, you can be a tree. Our biodegradable urn combines your ashes, natural soil additives, and a native tree of your choice. Be a tree and grow for tomorrow.
I want to be a tree.
Learn more at evergreenmemorialtrust.com.
Pat Lucas is committed to providing independent financial advice to help women and their families save money during this tax season. Call Pat at 540-798-8104, 540-798-8104. Securities and investment advisory services are offered solely through Equity Services Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC, 4401 Starkey Road, Roanoke, Virginia 24018, 540-989-4600. Step out the door with confidence, ready to conquer the day. Whether you are going to the cafe down the street or headed into work, you know you will always look your best in Cabi styles. Your stylist, Darlene Marshall, will help you pick the styles that make you sparkle. And Cabi has styles for all body types. Call Darlene at 540-330-6819, 540-330-6819, and follow her on Instagram at Dapper Darlin. Now from the Fox Radio Roanoke studio, here's Kathy Heberle.
Welcome to Sisterhood of the Second Act. I'm Kathy Heberle. Beth Macy is a 3-time New York Times best-selling author. One of those books, Dopesick, has been made into a miniseries for Hulu. Now, the former Roanoke Times reporter adds a Golden Globe nomination to her accolades. Thank you for joining us today, Beth.
Thanks for having me.
My
Excited
pleasure.
to be here.
Let's jump right in. Why did you make the switch from newspaper reporting to writing books?
Well, I just wanted to play in a bigger pond, really. I had been at the newspaper for 25 years, and I didn't really have a big goal of writing books, but I fell into this story that led to Factory Man, and I was just like, this needs to be a book. It's a social history piece, it's a family feud,
Absolutely.
It's a business story. It goes all over the globe and back to Galex, Virginia. And he was just such a great character. And then when that book came out in 2014, the newspaper was getting smaller and smaller.
Sure.
And as unfortunately newspapers have everywhere, I hadn't had a raise in 8 years, and I'm looking around, and this is just financially a better deal for me. And it's really cool to learn a new thing in your 50s.
Yes.
Speaking of second acts.
That's a great story. I love it. So, Dopesick, Factory Man, and True Vine were stories that originated in the Roanoke Times coverage area. Did you cover them for the paper before deciding to write them as books?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
So
Tell
I
us.
had written about the main people in True-Vine 25 years earlier.
Wow.
And so when I was casting about for a second book to try to write, I went back to that family who had had this terrible, horrific experience in Jim Crow, Virginia, with their relatives who had been kidnapped and sold to the circus because they were Black albino brothers, young brothers. And the story, you know, it's a great story of heroism. Their mother, an illiterate maid in Jim Crow, Virginia, like risked her life to get them back in 1927, right here in Roanoke, Virginia. And that was a story I had first teased out in the Roanoke Times. And similarly, Dopesick began with some reporting I did out in Hidden Valley area. Back when heroin first sort of popped up as a nascent but really growing problem in the wealthiest suburbs. Now, normally I wrote about marginalized communities and inequality, but this was something that spared no zip code in our community, and readers kind of literally went, what? Wealthy white kids are doing heroin? And so I then traced the beginnings of the heroin epidemic, which goes back to the OxyContin and the painkiller pill epidemic, and now more recently is fentanyl. And I'm just completing right now a book that's going to come out in August, which is a follow-up called Raising Lazarus, and the subtitle is Hope, Justice, and the Future of America's Overdose Crisis, sorry. And it comes out mid-August, and it's, you know, if Dopesick was about the problem, Raising Lazarus is about the solutions.
Oh, I like that. It's always good to offer a solution, and it's still an ongoing problem. So
every month when the CDC tallies the data, it's worse.
People need to hear this.
It's record-setting.
People need to be aware. They need to hear that. So Dopesick has taken on a life outside the pages, first with the Audible original Finding Tess, and now with the Hulu miniseries. Does this topic have special meaning to you?
It has special meaning to me because I've always written about outsiders and underdogs, and really there is no group more marginalized than people who have become addicted, many of them in the beginning through no fault of their own, because lies were told by this company, because we as a society tend to stigmatize drug users. We don't offer them treatment, you know, we just sort of abandon them once they're on the hook with it. And so I just really feel still that there's so much more to say about it. Absolutely. It's driving American deaths of despair, which, you know, for the first time in our history, our life expectancy is going down. And the main factor is drug overdose.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. We are talking with best-selling author Beth Macy, and you were one of the writers on Dopesick. How is writing a script different from writing a book?
It's completely different. When I'm working on a book, I'm doing all my interviews, I'm driving around, I'm talking to people on the phone, I'm following up via email. But when you're writing a show like this, it's 5 or 6, or sometimes like 15 or 20. Our room was pretty small, our writer's room. And we were very much working together on every single plot point. So we had one guy that was like really into the research, and he and I paired up a lot. We had one person in the room had been addicted to opioids himself and had spent time going to a methadone clinic. Our showrunner, Danny Strong, brought a ton of experience because he had done the writing for Game Change, Recount, The Butler, so he knew how to take a journalistic endeavor and turn it into a show. But I was constantly in contact with Danny while they were shooting. New information was coming out. All these cases are going on, these opioid litigation cases. And so as new books came out, as new information came out, literally there were nights where Danny and I would be on the phone and he would be rewriting a scene that they were going to be shooting.
Incorporate this information. Oh my goodness.
The next day.
That's kind of exciting though.
It was exciting.
I like that. So this is a heavy subject. You developed relationships with the people you interviewed. And how did writing this book impact you?
Well, it was hard. You know.
Was it?
Yeah, one of my main families that I followed lost their 28-year-old daughter on Christmas Eve. She was murdered. Her body was found in a dumpster. Again, this is another case of what I call medical abandonment. And, whenever she didn't have access to her addiction medications, she would sort of fall out of the system. And she had been flown to Las Vegas to try an abstinence-only treatment center. And when she failed out of that, she ended up homeless on the streets of Las Vegas, which was much harsher than in Roanoke. And
that's heartbreaking.
And so her mother and I got quite close. And, it's as a reporter, you never think you're going to be with somebody as they're saying goodbye to their battered daughter in a funeral home. And there's just no guidebook for kind of how to do that kind of story. And anything I've felt is just like a sliver in comparison to what these families have gone through.
Absolutely.
It's hit a third of American families, this epidemic.
No idea.
More than 1 million people have died.
Oh my goodness. We are talking with best-selling author Beth Macy. And just to go on to the next subject, you do have a new book in the works. What is it about? It sounds like a little bit more, how did you say, response? And when can we read it?
It'll come out August 16th.
Okay.
You can pre-order it now in
Yes.
all the places where you buy books.
The name of it?
It's called Raising Lazarus,
Okay.
Hope, Justice, and the Future of America's Overdose Crisis.
Excellent.
It's a really interesting story in that I embedded with some really heroic, totally inspiring people who are doing their best to bring care to the least of us. And I also tell the story of the activists on the ground who are trying to get the victims' voices heard in these very untransparent court cases. So you have Nan Goldin, who is a very famous photographer who, just recently succeeded in getting the Sackler wing name taken down from the Met. And a bunch of activists that she's been working with to try to shame them, shun them, and get accountability for 1 million deaths. So that's kind of a really propulsive narrative that sort of is a through line of the book. But most of the book is about solutions on the ground in communities in Appalachia, in North Carolina, in Indiana, in places where the opioid epidemic has hit hardest.
Okay. We have to wrap it up, but real quick. Will we see Factory Man or True Vine on the screen?
It's really too I know
soon.
it's been a long time, but
All right.
they've kind of stalled, and I'm still hopeful. I was hoping a little excitement over Dopesick might propel it along, so we'll see.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have a link to Beth's website in our show notes on our website, sisterhoodofthesecond-act.com. There's more Sisterhood of the Second Act ahead. Racing for Sobriety, one woman's story after this.
Pat Lucas is committed to providing independent financial advice to help women and their families save money during this tax season. Call Pat at 540-798-8104, 540-798-8104. Securities and investment advisory services are offered solely through Equity Services Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC, 4401 Starkey Road, Roanoke, Virginia 24018, 540-989-4600. Looking for your first home or retirement home? Realtor Monica Nicely can help you find it. Whether you're moving in or out of the Roanoke region, call Monica 540-449-2019, 540-449-2019. Alcova Mortgage Loan Officer Jonathan Sweat helps you seal the deal with a loan to suit your needs with great rates and terms. Call Jonathan 540-314-8843, 540-314-8843.
Alcova Mortgage, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS ID number 40508, MLSConsumerAccess.org. Terms and conditions apply. All loans subject to credit approval.
Once again from the Fox Radio Roanoke studio, here's Kathy Heberle.
Welcome back to Sisterhood of the Second Act. I'm Kathy Heberle. Pam Rickard's life seemed charmed back in the early 2000s. She had a great family life and was very professionally successful, but she was also hiding fear and pain. The well-known runner was self-medicating with alcohol until she hit bottom. Now she uses her passion for running to help others. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you for having me. So grateful to be here.
My pleasure. Pam, you seem to have everything. Married to a great guy and a mom, professionally successful, all while drinking. So what changed?
Well, I think the key there is that it looked so wonderful, but that was on the outside. On the inside, I mean, my family was and is wonderful. They were, growing and beautiful and doing their thing. But inside, I was not. And I appeared to be, but I was hiding a lot of what I know now to be kind of a perfect storm of arrogance and fear. I was successful. I had been successful in school, and I was grateful to move to Roanoke right out of college and begin a career at the Roanoke Times, which led to switching careers about 13 years later and going to work for the YMCA of Roanoke Valley and experiencing just a wonderful career with wonderful folks, and also experiencing some success with running. I'm by no means a professional runner, but I started running. Actually, my husband and I started kind of together when we were at Ohio University. We met at Ohio University.
Okay.
We met getting our journalism degrees. And so we were infamously all out one night, partying or whatever. And a group of us decided to challenge each other to run the homecoming 5K the next morning. And we were in no shape in any way to run a 5K, and we certainly did not train for it, but we thought it would be funny. So several of us did show up and run that 5K the next morning, and it was literally the first time I ever, probably not the first time I ever ran, because I would do a little bit of jogging here and there to lose weight or whatever, but it was the first race and the first time I ever actually was involved in anything officially as a run. So it went horribly, we felt terrible physically. It was a lark, so it was funny in a way. But I'm so grateful for it because there was a little bit of a spark, and for some reason, as much as miserable as I was, there was something about it that I wanted to try to do again, without going out the night before. And so I did. And that's kind of how I started running. Yes. So I never ran in high school or college.
It's probably the most unusual way I've ever heard.
Especially for someone who is now in recovery, that I began.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably appropriate. My first race I was quite hungover, but unfortunately, I did not realize that was going to become a problem later down the road, but it definitely was an early sign of it, because even though, sometimes in high school and college especially, drinking is accepted, and sometimes it's romanticized, and it's even encouraged by peers. Yes. But as I now look back, I know that I was drinking alcoholically and did not realize that until many years later. So anyway, but I was running, and I had run 7 marathons, and I was then working at the YMCA as a development director, and we were raising money to build the new YMCAs in Salem and downtown Roanoke. So that all was really great. But the thing about, again, I'm only an expert in my own story. I'm not a clinician. The disease of addiction is not necessarily, doesn't make sense. It's not linear. So I never drank, for example, when I was pregnant. We have 3 wonderful adult kids now, but I never drank along those years before I got sober when I was pregnant or breastfeeding or seriously training for a marathon. And hence the fact that I could control it. But the fact is that wasn't even true. I didn't know it at the time, which is one of the examples of denial.
Well, we heard how you started. What was bottom for you?
We had our 2 daughters in 1989 and 1992, and then when I was 40 in 2002, and my husband was almost 42, we found out we were pregnant, and it was a wonderful surprise, but it wasn't. I mean, it was quite a surprise at that age, especially. Sure. And I remember at the time thinking, I was out on a run, and I remember exactly where I was when I thought, because I was mulling over this fact that we're having another baby. We have a 14-year-old, 10-year-old. and we're having a baby. Okay, this is, we're going to do this. This is meant to be God's will, the whole bit. But my main thought was, I'm going to get this drinking thing under control for sure now, because it had gotten out of control. I knew it was. Externally, again, you couldn't tell. My husband was starting to have a few concerns here and there, but I was very, very good at hiding it, especially because I was so high functioning. But I knew at that moment on that run that I had a little bit of a relief that I was pregnant, because I wasn't going to drink for a year.
I see.
And as weird or silly as that sounds, I love that memory because it helps me remember how insidious and cunning the disease of addiction and alcoholism really is.
Absolutely.
So, because again, I remember even where I was when I had that thought. So didn't drink for a year. Couldn't wait to stop breastfeeding, to be honest with you, so that I could have a glass of wine, and even joked about it. And I've heard other moms joke about that, and nothing against it. If you're not an alcoholic, if you can joke about the fact that you get to have a glass of wine after you stop breastfeeding. But as I look back on it now, it kind of mortifies me that I felt that way. So.
But it made sense at the time.
It did.
I'm sure.
It did.
We are talking with runner Pam Rickard, who races to raise awareness for the disease of addiction. So tell us, what role did running play in helping you stay sober?
Well, and I don't even think I even answered your question about what was
Sure.
the bottom. The bottom was when I started drinking shortly after Charlie was born in 2003. Well, I started drinking probably 3 to 6 months after, when she was 3 to 6 months old. It escalated quickly. The alcoholism escalated quickly. What I thought was going to reset me and I was going to be fine and drink like a normal person now, or not have these issues of blacking out and not remembering things and trying to fake it when Tom would ask me things. It actually got bad very quickly. And so I started experiencing a lot of external consequences. I didn't go to bars and so forth, but it didn't matter. I was hiding alcohol. There were a lot of external physical consequences, DUIs, all that were, I experienced 3 DUIs within 18 months, and which ultimately resulted in pleading guilty, having a felony, and spending 3 months in jail when I was 6 months sober. But we won't go down that road yet, because you didn't even ask about that. But I'll tell you, my bottom, it's important for me to share that my bottom was not even that 3rd DUI, let alone my 1st and 2nd.
Oh my.
I received that DUI in February of 2006, Super Bowl weekend, but I did not get sober until April 17th, 2006. And so I believe the external consequences are important and brutal, and usually something like that, something that does happen, will at least, if not start our road to recovery, it will get our attention enough, hopefully, because I'm so grateful that God allowed me to live long enough and never hurt anyone long enough to get to that point where I did reach my bottom. I felt so empty, and I didn't know what to do. I was in my bedroom one day, and I knew that I truly didn't want to be alive anymore. But I knew I just could not. I felt like my husband would be okay. There would be someone wonderful out there for him because he's an incredible guy. But my children would always have a mom who took her life. So I remember having this little almost dialogue with myself as I was lying on my bed. So that is the moment I think of as my bottom.
Okay.
And that led me to really get on and at least call one of these places that I kept saying I was going to look into. And I did that day. And that's what ultimately led me to a place in Williamsburg. I still looked okay on the outside, but I was just empty and in a grief almost because I didn't really believe that I could ever be okay at this point. And but I was still looking for a place that treated professionals, because I'm a college educated person who I left my career. I didn't lose my job. I decided to leave my job to stay home with our then 2-year-old, almost 3-year-old. But in fact, it wasn't for that. It was because I I was exhausted and I couldn't figure out how to keep the plate spinning anymore. And it was because of alcohol.
I understand. And I'm so happy that you're sharing your story. I think it's going to reach a lot of people.
Thank you.
And I really think that that's what your purpose here now is for sharing that. But you have, we have to wrap it up shortly, but you have run hundreds of races, marathons, ultra marathons. What was it like to run that first race sober? Just share that bit with us.
Well, actually, the first 3 miles I ever ran sober, I remember calling my husband. He's a teacher at Dudley Elementary, and I called and actually asked him to get out of class because I was sobbing. Because when I got sober, again, I know we don't have time here, but when I got sober, my goal finally, because I finally surrendered, and it was simple for me. I basically had to have the humility, be humble enough to follow directions. And the directions included all kinds of things. Nobody told me I had to run. I had to take care of my body physically, but I knew enough to put the running aside and really focus on becoming, not just staying sober, not just staying sober from drugs or alcohol, but becoming who I really should be, because I didn't even know who that was anymore. So I ran 3 miles one day, called my husband at work, and we agreed I would run one more marathon as a sober person. And that led to everything else and what I do today, which is work with people at the Herren Project, which is a not-for-profit that helps people all over the country. And we use running to help raise money for Herren Project's work of helping people get into treatment, finish their sobriety.
What do they do?
Yes, we do treatment navigation, support services, prevention, education, a lot of aftercare. We treat folks who we serve people who everything from people who don't know what to do when they realize they want to get help, to family members who have someone who doesn't think they need help or want help, to the prevention and education of the disease of addiction, helping people afford to go to, we do scholarships to help people afford treatment and or sober living. We have 25 different support groups that people from all over the country attend virtually. And those are for families. We have one recovery support group, but all of the rest of the 25 are for family members because it's a family disease.
Okay. It has been such a pleasure to have you on our show. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us, Pam, with your honesty and your integrity and your heart to give back. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure having you. And we will have Pam's contact information on our show notes, on our website, sisterhoodofthesecond-act.com. And we'll be back to wrap up with the show after this.
Kathy's wardrobe provided by Cabi stylist Darlene Marshall. See the styles in our show notes at sisterhoodofthesecond-act.com.
I want to thank Beth Macy and Pam Rickard for being with us today and for raising our awareness by sharing their knowledge and experiences with different forms of addiction. I'm Kathy Heberle. Join us next week for another edition of Sisterhood of the Second Act.